Hi guys, finally some good news regarding the PPE contracts that were handed out like sweets during the pandemic by Boris Johnson's administration. Remember, all you had to do at the time was set up a company, even on your own, make a small donation to the Conservative Party, an MP, and you won a contract worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds. Now, Michelle Mone, who's a member of the House of Lords, has finally faced justice. Have a listen to this.
A judgment just been handed down. PPE Medpro, the company linked to Michelle Mone, must repay almost £120 million, £22 million for breaching a contract to supply 25 million surgical gowns. So this is sounds like a resounding success and victory for the Department of Health in pursuing Michelle Mone and Doug Barrowman, the ultimate controller of this company, and a defeat for Baroness Mone. Yesterday, she issued a long statement on social media saying she had been scapegoated. The Department of Health was not pursuing any of the other companies that had supplied PPE, which turned out to be defective. She said it was trying to cover up its own failings, the government's failings in the disaster, as she called it, of the PPE procurement process, which saw about £10 billion worth of equipment thrown away. She also published letters in which the PPE Medpro had offered to settle this case twice. It had offered the Department of Health £20 million and then £25 million without accepting any liability. We haven't seen the full judgment yet, so not aware whether liability has been accepted here, but the Department of Health rejected those attempts to settle, and I would imagine will be feeling vindicated. The judge has ordered here that the full amount of that contract, nearly £122 million, will be repaid. Quite where the money will come from is an interesting question. PPE Medpro filed for liquidation a few days ago. Its account showed assets of over £600,000. Michelle Mone said yesterday the Department of Health is pursuing a company that it knows doesn't have any funds. The question.
Okay, so isn't it convenient that the company went into liquidation a few days ago? Now, Michelle Mone has a yacht, as far as I know, so perhaps that can be sold. Her husband is quite rich. Maybe they have a few mansions that could be sold off to cover these costs. And notice how they tried to settle out of court. So they knew that they were in the wrong. If you know you're in the wrong, you don't try to settle out of court. If you believe you're right, then you fight it in court. It's just they had to fight it because the government would not settle with them. And this is just one example of the level of corruption that took place. I actually believe that Michelle Mone and this company, although it's going into liquidation, should likely be held for corporate manslaughter or on manslaughter charges, because this defective PPE was likely used in a situation where people lost their lives. People were not protected fully, either those wearing the PPE or those who were interacting with those wearing the PPE. So the public health was put in danger because of defective PPE materials. And Michelle Mone was running the company or connected to that company. We know why these people won these contracts, because they were donors to the Conservative Party. Deep and utter corruption there. And I think more people should face charges. Members of the Conservative Party who handed out these contracts should face charges. Boris Johnson should likely face charges because he was in charge of the whole thing anyway. He was Prime Minister at the time. The book ends with him. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. But at least here's some positive news. A bit of punishment for those who engaged in this corruption. But the only true story or true aspect of this is that PPE Medpro is the scapegoat here, if it's a case of only going after them. We know there were hundreds of companies potentially that were involved in this corruption. People setting up companies who had no business in PPE, winning massive contracts, and then of course trying to buy it in from China and sell it on to the NHS and make a profit out of that. And even the Conservatives at the time were saying, we need to do this because we don't have enough PPE. We need to forget about the rules. We need to focus on dealing with the pandemic. At a time when they ignored advice from scientists and they ignored the findings of Operation Cygnus, which was, of course, to make sure that you have enough PPE in the case of a pandemic. The Conservatives at the time refused to take on board those recommendations. So they found themselves in a situation where they didn't have sufficient PPE, and then they had to reach out to companies, but they couldn't find enough companies, allegedly. So they brought on board other companies who had miraculously been set up a few days before and gave them massive contracts. And for some strange coincidence, some of these companies were run by people who had donated to the Conservative Party. Pure and utter corruption. So finally, there's a bit of justice here. But as I said before, perhaps manslaughter charges need to be levelled at some of these individuals as well. Because if they were providing defective PPE, this put lives in danger, and perhaps some people lost their lives as a result of this. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.